and welcome to this week's edition of TRP News, a production of the United States Rational Progressive Party and therationalprogressive.com. Thank you for joining me. I'm your host, James Andre, and here's what's been happening. The Democratic primary is another week closer, and last week brought us the DNC annual summer meeting in Minneapolis. The media focus was on criticism from O'Malley and Bernie Sanders in regards to voter enthusiasm and the so-called limited debate schedule. What many are still trying to ignore is that Hillary Clinton is winning by a country mile. Apparently, she's racked up more endorsements of significance at this stage of the race than any non-incumbent Democratic presidential candidate ever. Yet somehow trailing candidates and their supporters think that adding more debates will change that equation or somehow benefit the Democratic Party. I just don't see it. There are only two real contenders in the race at this point, and how many debates we should have and who should be allowed to debate is just a bunch of who shot John. Currently, there's one debate per month starting October 13th until the first primary, February 1st in Iowa. After that, there are two more debates, and that seems to me to be plenty of time to make up your mind. Sanders has been calling for issue-specific debates, like on environmentalism. All this shows is that Sanders' campaign is about him, not the party, and not about beating Republicans. This is the Democratic primary, folks. This is about who's best for the Democratic Party. Now, you may think that, oh, the Democrats, they're bought and sold, paid for, they're corrupt, but it's their party. So you can't go to their party and then demand that they do something that's not in their interest. It just doesn't make sense. If Bernie wanted to have debates about policy, he should have joined the Dem Party and pushed for a platform. The primary is about leadership, not establishing policy. That is a question for individual candidates, not something that needs debate. And I'm tired of hearing complaints about the process being rigged. To me, there's something wrong with people who complain about the process and join and try to reap the benefits of the process like Bernie Sanders. You complain and bash Democrats all along, but then suddenly you want the Democratic Party to listen to you, to support you, to use their assets to help you get elected to public office. There's something just a little bit wrong about that, and he still has not officially become a Democrat. And again, I point out, if the process is rigged, then by Sanders' own assessment, he can't win. If the process is not rigged, then clearly he's not the favorite candidate and he will not win. So, it just doesn't make sense to me, folks. If the system is corrupt, then he has no chance. If the system's not corrupt, then he's not the favorite candidate. So what is the rationale here? So let's take a look at the numbers. First, word is out of the Clinton camp that they have received pledges from 400 of the 700 plus superdelegates that will be electing the nominee at the Democratic National Convention. That's around 60% of the superdelegates. Remember, I told you last week, out of those 700, and Nate Silver had an article out where they did a discussion about this, very, very few are going to vote for Sanders. That means that if Clinton and Sanders split the vote across the board in all these Democratic primaries, Sanders still loses. And I went into this last week. It's a proportional system. So if Sanders and Clinton split the vote on every primary 50%, Sanders will lose because of the superdelegates, who have already 60% by a majority pledged their support for Clinton. So how is the vote looking in these primaries? Well, the Real Clear Politics polling average currently has Clinton plus 21.5 nationally. So plus 21.5 points. Most of these polls have Joe Biden included in the polling, and there's been some talk of Biden getting in, but people, it's not going to happen. Joe Biden is not getting in. It's far too late for that. It's not going to happen. He hasn't put together the infrastructure. He doesn't have the support. He hasn't started the fundraising. He's just still stuck in the gate. And I don't think he's that foolish to sort of mess up his legacy, and as he said, being emotionally banged up right now, to come out and just sort of fall on his face. I don't think he's going to want that to happen. So the last two polls, without Biden included, national polls, have Clinton plus 26 and plus 34. So there's a lot of attention this week. An Iowa poll just out showing Sanders within 8 points of Clinton. So the poll shows that Sanders definitely has a window. Yes, I'm saying it. He has a window to win the caucuses in Iowa, the primary in Iowa. But again, splitting the vote with Clinton is not enough. He needs resounding wins. He needs to take like 60% in order to get the Democratic nomination. Not just 60% in Iowa, 60% across the board. So that same poll from the Des Moines Register shows that if Clinton dropped out of the race, 51% would still like someone else to get into the race. So even if Clinton wasn't there, more than half the people would like to see another candidate. So it also shows that 66% are mostly confident that Clinton will win the general election if she is nominated. So the first debate is about 6 weeks away, and the first primary is about 5 months away, February 1st. The numbers show some movement, but I don't think enough for Sanders to stand any realistic chance. It's my suspicion, and I'm not yet willing to make a prediction, but my suspicion that as we get closer to the first primaries and see actual campaign rallies from Clinton, and we see her ground teams go to work, we will also begin to see Sanders' campaign start to fall apart. If he has to work this hard, this early, I don't see his campaign keeping traction once the primary schedule heats up. And certainly, I don't see him overcoming Clinton's historical and deep base of support to wind up with a majority of delegates at the convention. It's just not going to happen. And I leave you with this from Aaron Gupta at Counterpunch. Quote, simply put, you have a better chance of Jennifer Lawrence or Idris Elba calling you up and saying they want to be your friend with benefits than Bernie Sanders has of becoming the next president. Another story out of the DNC summer meeting is about a resolution in support of the Iran nuclear deal. DNC Chair Wasserman-Schultz, already taking heat over what some are calling a limited debate schedule, found herself in the crosshairs again over the failure of the DNC to adopt a resolution supporting President Obama and the nuclear inspection agreement with Iran. The resolution was intended to put the DNC on record in support of the agreement, and while Wasserman-Schultz was blamed for blocking the resolution, the proposal came after the August 6th deadline for submission to the DNC Resolution Committee. In the end, a letter of support was produced and gathered the signatures of a majority of DNC members. Wasserman-Schultz, like Senator Schumer, represents a heavily Jewish district. Schumer has been taking heat for publicly stating he will not support the Iran deal. I think what is right, and I do believe that any thinking person needs to support this deal as a good option for peace. However, I don't agree with the mob mentality of calling for people's heads when they don't perfectly align with what we want. And that's what I saw a lot of online after this announcement came out. It's immediately off with her head, get rid of Debbie Wasserman-Schultz. And let me tell you, first of all, the DNC chair job is pretty much a thankless position. It's a tough position. And to immediately jump down someone's throat every time things don't go exactly right is just not the way. First of all, that's just how the Tea Party does it. That's how the right wing does it. And we need to be more understanding and more thoughtful about our reactions to these things as progressives and liberals. But second of all, as I've said many times, I'm no Democrat, and I think, sure, the Democratic Party has plenty of issues as far as I'm concerned. However, it's the Democratic Party, and you have to believe that these people are trying to do what's in the best interest of the most people. And the Democratic Democratic Party is a big tent party. There's some conservative people. There's some extremely progressive people. Bernie Sanders is so progressive, he's not even in the party. So when you have a chairperson who's trying to juggle all these things, and then on top of that, you not only have competing interests, but you have these rules, regulations, rules of procedure, all these organizational matters that tie into it that, trust me, you don't know anything about. You out there who are criticizing and calling for Debbie Wasserman-Schultz's head don't know anything about. So let's find out something about it. So like, to me, again, that's Tea Party behavior that has infected politics across the board. So let's not look to cut off heads. Let's look for ways to move forward, to build on success, and let's not focus on the shortcomings. Okay, let's not crucify others for one bad decision or what we perceive as a mistake someone has made. We may not like that, for example, drilling has been approved in the Arctic, but that does not automatically negate all the other progress that has been made when it comes to climate and the environment. And let's take positions based on knowledge and information, not because we don't feel like it's right. That doesn't sound good. We didn't support the Iran resolution. We didn't, the DNC is not supporting the president in the Iran resolution. Okay, this is not the same thing as 2014, folks. This is a resolution where you want to call for someone's head, you want to criticize and put down the DNC, you want to sort of denigrate the best option we have of beating the Republicans over a resolution that's essentially and ultimately means very little. It doesn't make sense, okay? Let's focus on what's important. Chasing the latest outrage of the day, we allow ourselves to be distracted from long-term goals, and that's what happens. So the media sets up these straw men, and we start tilting at windmills, and we start burning effigies, but the truth is this does not matter. And I'll tell you this, one example, people are complaining about this DNC resolution and Debbie Wasserman-Schultz and the number of debates, but how many of you who are complaining about these things know what the Democratic National Committee and the Democratic Party, how many of you know what their party platform is? Okay? Do you know that? And do you know when it's going to be updated for this election cycle? Do you know that? If you don't know these things, then what are you complaining about because you don't know what's going on? Now, I'm sorry to put it so harshly, but let's get a grip, people. Let's focus on what's important. And for you people, especially people who aren't even out there, who aren't even on the ground, who aren't even putting sweat and donations and calling and supporting your representatives who are in the Democratic Party. As I've said, I'm no Democrat, so I'm going for the people who I think are going to do the most, because we all have limited time, so I go for the people who I think are going to be able to do the most, and I can devote my energy to supporting. So if you aren't doing that, if you don't know what's going on, don't start going and shooting from the hip. That's a Republican style. That's a Tea Party style. If you don't know what the platform is, if you don't know what the rules are, that August 6th is the deadline for submitting the resolution in the first place, and this new resolution came after that deadline, well, then why are you calling for someone's job, people? That's just not right. It's not the way to do it, and it's not the progressive way to go about governing, to go about building policy and consensus, and go about moving forward. Don't complain about how the machine is built if you don't know anything about the nuts and bolts. And in Washington, D.C., another shutdown of the federal government is looming on October 1st as Congress is failing all attempts to come up with a spending bill. Besides the usual disagreements over social versus Department of Defense spending, the current major hangup is Planned Parenthood. A stubborn Republican faction is insisting they will not support any bill that does not specifically exclude funds from going to the organization. Republican leaders are well aware that any bill excluding Planned Parenthood would die in the Senate and, if not, be vetoed by President Obama. 18 Republicans have come out publicly saying they will not vote for any funding bill that doesn't explicitly cut off funding. Senate Leader Mitch McConnell, points out that every time this sort of budget hostage taking has been tried, the issue being protested is lost to the fact that the federal government is shut down. Of course, the media focuses on the government being shut down, and millions of federal workers do not receive pay, millions of government agencies close, and that becomes the story, not Planned Parenthood, which many people support. Meanwhile, House Leader Boehner is behind investigations into the group, Planned Parenthood, that includes 3 House committees. The House Energy and Commerce Committee is investigating Planned Parenthood's brokers and independent advisors. The House Judiciary Committee is examining Justice Department's enforcement of applicable laws. And the House Oversight and Government Reform is looking into the organization's use of federal money. Once Congress returns after Labor Day, lawmakers will have 12 days in session, 12 days to fund the government. Complicating matters is the CBO announcement that national debt will exceed the debt ceiling by mid-November. The debt ceiling is the limit after which the government can no longer borrow money. And since following years of tax cuts, the government operates yearly at a deficit. That effectively means the government must close. So we have a short-term highway bill. We have no more funding of the Export-Import Bank. We have no spending bills coming out of Congress as of yet over Planned Parenthood. And we have the debt ceiling, which caused the last government shutdown, being exceeded coming this November. So it looks like not only that, the primary season has begun and is well underway. So it looks like we're going to have an interesting fall, and we will keep you posted on the updates out of Washington. And this past week near Houston, Texas, Sheriff's Deputy Deputy Goforth was shot to death at a gas station while getting gas for his patrol car. Officials characterized the attack as unprovoked and say there was no evidence that the deputy and the shooter knew each other. They assumed that Goforth was targeted because he was in uniform. This is not the only assumption made by officials. Despite admitting that there's no information about the motivation behind the crime, the sheriff and others were quick to point the finger at the Black Lives Matter movement. The sheriff, district attorney, and interest groups were quoted variously as saying the attack was an attack on the fabric of society, that the rhetoric has gotten out of control, and they're making cops seem bad. While this is a terrible, horrific act, it is not at all unpredictable. It is predictable because we have a clear denial of responsibility from law enforcement and the justice system, and a clear demonstrated effort to single out people of color and anyone else who happens to question the law enforcement power structure. With no connection whatsoever, officials point the finger at Black Lives Matter, a movement working to end violence, as the cause of violence. And the only connection to be made to the killing of Deputy Goforth, the assailant was black in Houston. They want to cry about how all law enforcement is being made to look bad while ignoring the consequences of the so-called blue wall of silence that allows those few bad apples to not only operate with impunity, but with the implicit support of their associates. Yes, this is entirely predictable. When you suit up in the gear of war, deploy equipment designed for war, and patrol the streets with a war-like mentality as you go to war with the citizens you're sworn to protect, you will get what you prepared for: war. What makes law enforcement look bad is prioritizing obedience and the exercise of power over domestic tranquility. What has gotten out of control is a justice system that allows the good guys to break the law because they are a part of a legal gang. What is an attack on the fabric of society are law enforcement policies that rely on firearms first instead of sound peacekeeping tactics. Unfortunately, it seems that many will never let go of this mentality of conflict. It seems that many, like Harris County Sheriff Ron Hickman, will always seek an opportunity to point fingers and foment division. And as it stands now, it seems we have a long way to go before we are free of the power-addled racists who equate black people being asked not to be shot down in the street with an attack on law enforcement. And now news of the Islamic State. ISIL continued its violent rampage and its destruction of historical monuments that it considers sacrilegious. The group has destroyed part of an ancient temple in Syria's Palmyra city. The militants targeted the Temple of Bel, a Roman-era structure in the central desert city. This follows setting off explosives in the ancient Baal Shaman temple on August 25th. This month, the group beheaded the 82-year-old Syrian archaeologist who had looked after Palmyra's ruins for 4 decades and hung his body in public. ISIL has executed more than 90 people, a third of them civilians, over the past month in areas of war-torn Syria. According to the Britain-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, this has brought to 3,156 people the number of ISIL executions in Syria. Yesterday, ISIL fighters pushed into southern Damascus, clashing with rival militants just a few kilometers from the center of the Syrian capital. The extremist group has seized about 1/3 of Syria and neighboring Iraq over the past year. Also, more reports about ISIL and the systematic rape of thousands of young girls and women who are sold as sex slaves. Most of the victims are Yazidis captured when ISIL invaded northern Iraq last year. The New York Times documented ISIL's revival of slavery with warehouses and viewing rooms where Yazidi girls are auctioned. And this from the Department of Defense on Operation Inherent Resolve, or the fight against ISIL. As of August 15th, 2015, the total cost of operations related to ISIL since kinetic operations started on August 8th, 2014, is $3.7 billion. And the average daily cost is $9.9 million for 373 days of operations. Friday's report records 4 airstrikes in Syria and 21 airstrikes in Iraq. And from the Department of Defense, coalition nations conducting airstrikes in Iraq include the United States, Australia, Canada, Denmark, France, Jordan, the Netherlands, and the United Kingdom. Coalition nations conducting airstrikes in Syria include the United States, Bahrain, Canada, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. And finally this week, an update on the global migrant crisis. Last week I reported on the successful rescue of hundreds of migrants by the Italian Navy. This week, at least 112 have died off the coast of Libya as 2 boats full of migrants capsized. 198 people have been rescued, while 30 to 40 others remain missing. In Hungary, 71 people were found suffocated to death in an abandoned truck on the main highway between Budapest and Vienna. It is suspected that the people were left to die by smugglers. Hungary has been building a 109-mile-long razor wire fence to prevent migrants from entering the country. Some blame the country's tough stance on migration for migrants turning to smugglers to get through the country to the EU. Hungary is the border with the EU's Schengen zone, an area of free movement that does not require passports or identification. While Hungary is trying to prevent people from entering the country, they are also barring migrants from leaving if they are caught and processed. So they're trying to prevent them from getting in. Once they are in, they won't let them leave. The Washington Post reports that Hungarian police, using blatant racial profiling, stood in front of Budapest's main train station, allowing white and lighter-skinned people to pass through, but stopping and demanding papers from virtually all darker-skinned people. And as I reported last week, Hungary is preparing stricter laws that would imprison in Hungarian prisons for 4 years the very people they were attempting to keep out. So they're trying to keep them out. Once they're in, they won't let them leave. And once they're in, they're arresting them and imprisoning them in Hungary for 4 years. Not yet, but that's the upcoming laws that they are preparing now. Hungarian officials hold up America as an example. Quote, "Think with the brains of an American," says government spokesman Zoltán Kovács. "Would it be acceptable, even if you are a refugee coming from war, to enter the U.S. illegally and without papers? No." Luxembourg, which holds the rotating EU presidency, called interior ministers from all 28 member states to an extraordinary meeting on September 14th, saying, "The situation of migration phenomena outside and inside the European Union has recently taken unprecedented proportions." Luxembourg said the meeting would focus on policies on sending some migrants home and measures to prevent human trafficking. Sunday, Hungarian officials announced an arrest and the deaths of 71 migrants found suffocated in a truck, bringing the total arrests to 5. The 4 Bulgarians and an Afghani are suspected members of a Bulgarian-Hungarian smuggling ring. So once again, the migrant crisis continues to grow exponentially, numbers exceeding by a great deal numbers from last year. This is the peak of the migrant season, summertime, when most try to cross the Mediterranean and other borders and other natural limitations to travel. Many are dying, and as the UN has reported, there's somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 to 60 million people worldwide, and this is not just the Mediterranean, but we're talking about Southeast Asia, Asians as well. We still have the earthquake fallout in Tibet, and what this all boils down to, folks, is resources, safety, and opportunity. So, you have people, and again, and I reported on this months ago, you still have people from Darfur living in camps. You have people from a lot of these refugees from a lot of situations and conflicts around the world who still really don't have a place to live. So if you're wondering where these migrants are coming from, we've never historically done anything to accommodate them, to help them. We still have Boko Haram kidnapping hundreds of schoolgirls. We have ISIS kidnapping school kids and indoctrinating them. So where are these people coming from? Where they just have been displaced over years and years and years. They have nowhere to go. And so either they are running for Western countries, developed countries, or they are running into the arms of terrorists. So, or voluntarily or involuntarily. So, folks, there has to be more done than just building walls, building fences, and enforcing borders. We have to find a way to we have a global economy, we have a global energy use, we have to find a way to accommodate the global movement of people. People are the number one resource, the number one priority, and as humans, they should be our number one concern. So that's it for me this week. I'm James Andre. I want to thank you for joining me. Please give us a comment, like us on Facebook, or like this video. If you have anything to say, we're more than happy to hear from you in the comments below the video or on our website, therationalprogressive.com. You can catch us on Facebook, Twitter, and other than that, thank you for joining me. I appreciate you checking this video out. And don't forget to subscribe at the beginning of the video. I think we'll stick another one here. Now, we haven't been doing that. We'll add that one too, just to help you out. Love subscribers, and we'll see you again next week. All right, have a good week.